prioritizing self-care in your life and what that has looked like for you. Talk to me about your journey with that.
Oh, that's a big one. And I think it's so important. You mentioned discipline was a big part of that. And self-care for me when I was younger was all about the physical. I started exercising in high school, really, and just kind of have been ever since. It's really, really important to me, some form of exercise. And but self-care has evolved now that I'm, in my late 50s. I can actually say that now. And it's not just the physical, it's also the mental and the spiritual as well.
Yes.
And I call those my three-legged stool, when we talk about the pillars, which we might discuss. And it's really a critical part. And I think that there's a lot of conversation around self-care, and it can mean everything from going to the spa, getting your nails done, right? And when I talk about self-care, yes, those are nice things, but I'm talking about habits and routines and really sustainable practices that will help you navigate through daily life. So that's kind of my approach to it.
Absolutely. What works for you?
So I am a huge person with routine, again, discipline and attention. And I got to a point in my life not so long ago when it was probably about 3 or 4 years ago, when I realized that what I was doing is in the morning, I would get up, I'd roll downstairs in my pajamas with a cup of coffee, I'd scroll through my feed, and all of a sudden I was like, oh shoot, where's the time gone? Now I need to go out and get to the gym, right? Right. That was important. I hadn't walked the dogs. I hadn't done any of the things that were important to me. So I decided that what I would start doing is getting up at the same time every morning, which now is 5:45. And I get dressed for the gym in my morning, wash my face, brush my teeth. I go downstairs, I feed the dogs. Then I do my meditation, which is really important to me. Then I walk the dog and come back, and then I go to the gym. And that's my morning, Monday through Friday for the most part. And what I found is that what the routine does is allows you to, as I talked about, sustainable practices and those habits. I know that by, 9:30 every day that I have done those things that are feeding my soul and nourishing me. And that no matter what happens the rest of the day, I don't have to think, oh my God, how am I going to fit that in?
Right. And I think it changes the lens and how you're not feeling rushed. You're not feeling like you go to the gym in an even better mindset, which probably allows you to get even a better workout in because you're not just fixated on those things you didn't get to. I think exactly. And you've got even starting that day feeling full, feeling good allows you to enter the day without feeling behind, without feeling stressed, without feeling like a martyr, without feeling like you're giving from something you don't have to give. So I love that. I love that routine. And I love how you practice that and found that thing that works for you. And I think that's so key for people. Find that thing that works for you. And don't be afraid to prioritize that. It's not selfish. You're going to be better to yourself and you're going to be better to be around when you take the time to do that.
Absolutely.
Taking care of our emotional health as much as our physical health. You already touched on that. Your website is full of information on that. You've got blogs that talk about that. How did you get to that space? When did you understand the importance and the connection of that?
Oh, here's the big story. So when I was a young woman, I was really, really focused on, the life vision where I went to a good school, I got a good job, and then married my husband, it was all lined up. I had my 2 kids, I had a boy and a girl, and I literally wrote in my journal, I know I will have made it when I have my Volvo station wagon. I have the Volvo station wagon. So this is proof that visioning works. But what I left out was the feeling I wanted to have. And I was so focused on getting to the next step that I never stopped to think about what my purpose was. What was I passionate about? It was like, I was a robot. I was putting one foot in front of the other. So I got to this place with my beautiful family. I love them intensely, but there's something missing. I had this hole inside, and there was so much guilt around that. There was so much, loneliness and shame and isolation. And, today, thank goodness, you have the internet, which you can go online and sign up for a therapist. My daughter, who's 26, says, how come you never talk to us about therapy? Actually, she's 27. She doesn't get mad with that. And I said, because if we were doing it back then, we weren't going to talk about it. And
no, there was something wrong with us.
Yes, exactly. So I was really suffering by myself, and I tried to communicate to my husband. But when you think that there's something wrong with you and that you're crazy, it doesn't lend itself to clear communication. Like I had no idea what was happening. I had everything that I should be happy. And the guilt associated with, here's this beautiful life that I created. This is all the stuff I wanted, and I'm not happy. Wow, I'm a bad person. So I suffered with that for a really long time.
Jeez.
And that was probably in my early to mid 30s.
Yeah.
And then, went through the ups and downs, and it was really a long journey. I finally got to the point where, through self-help books, because that's pretty much what we had, and just realized that in order to understand what mattered to me, I had to get to know who I was, which is,
yes.
So I started spending time. I was working full time. So I'd get up in the morning before the kids got up, and I would just sit there and I'd just ask myself questions and write down whatever came up. And it was a long process. It took, there was a lot of mornings where nothing was on the paper.
Yeah.
But I really stuck with it. And that just started that, it kind of triggered that thought of what matters to me, and just being in that inquiry, which for most moms is not part of the conversation.
Yeah.
So that's how I slowly just got to go, well, this feels really good. And I feel better when I work out and eat right. And so just started building those things into my life as I had time for them.
Well, you hit on so many important things, and I was nodding my head vigorously because I understand this path very well. And I'm 53. I think those of us that came up in the 70s, 80s, early 90s, very much, a lot of us were first generation college grads. A lot of us were, and we were like, okay, we've got access to this. There was more things were opening up to women beyond being a teacher or a nurse. Not that, and those things are wonderful. I have so much reverence for those, but that's kind of what was available. But we were starting to get, rooms were opening up for us. And so we were kind of like, all right, it's time to get the degree, meet the partner, buy the house, get the dog, get the car, have the kids, do the thing, and it'll be awesome. And in no space in there were we allowed to ask about how we feel about anything. What did we want? There were a lot of expectations around us. These things are available. Go for it. You've got access to them. And that is true. But I think what I'm seeing, I have 3 daughters in their 20s. What I'm seeing them do differently, and I think they learned from our journey, is they're stopping and say, what do I want to do, and how do I want to live within that, rather than going and doing the thing and then being in the thing and realizing this doesn't feel like it should. Like I literally so relate to that. Sitting down, I started to practice probably 5 years ago, where I was prompted, because I understand the whole self-help books, because also feeling multiple emotions and processing them from the time we were kids, that wasn't encouraged. It was a very much,
suck it up,
put
a
on
smile on your face,
put on your big girl panties and go do the thing. And so you didn't sit down and process all you were feeling or work it out. And so and then later, all of a sudden you've got all this angst in you and you don't know where it came from because you didn't move through it earlier. And, but I think that has been a path that a lot of women in our generation took.
Yes.
And then you get to a point and you're like, I remembered somebody like 5 years ago, what are you passionate about? What do you want to do next? What do you care about? I had no idea. I'm like, well, I got the kids are all in college and we've got this nice space and I'm doing meaningful work. But within that, a lot of things were coming up that I just felt this like foreboding joy. And so, and I was like, I have no idea how to answer some of these questions about myself. I can answer according to how people view me. I can tell you what the people in my life and my relationships think that I am, but is that truly who I am? And how does that feel to me?
Right.
And
right.
Boy, oh boy, it's an eye opener. It
sure is. And that story reminds me of that moment, one of the critical moments in my journey when I was young. I was an, upward executive. I was working for a huge multinational company. We were in New York. I was sitting around with my coworkers. I think I had my daughter at the time. I hadn't had my son yet. And the president comes and sits down with us, president of our division, so let's go around the circle and talk about what you're passionate about. And I was like, my throat closed up, my palms started sweating, and I knew, obviously, I have to say my job. I knew
absolutely that was the expected answer.
Yes. Yep. Of course, I'm going to say that, but I recognized at that moment that it wasn't something I felt, and I was like, "There's something wrong when passion is supposed to be something you feel."
Yes.
And I didn't feel that. So I relate to that story. Yeah.
Well, and I don't think that we were told that it was okay to listen to our inner knowing. We're told a lot about things about trusting our bodies. Our bodies will tell us and send us signals. And if we don't do something about it, it'll show up in very abrupt, sometimes not healthy ways.
Yes.
But we weren't taught to trust that inner knowing, that instinct within us.
Even make time to listen.
Yeah, to even know that it was a thing.
Yeah. Because we're so busy doing the thing. And to your point, it was all about, I can do it all. I can have it all. That was the big liberating idea. It was like, I can have the corner office and the Volvo station wagon and my 2 kids, and it'll all be great.
Yeah. And I'll balance it all, and I'll be a champion, and I'll be so happy and fulfilled.
Yes.
And now, instead, I'm exhausted, depleted, and I can't figure out how I got here.
Yeah. Totally.
And then the kids leave, and then you're like, what the frick? So yeah. Oh my gosh. So much good there. So again, pay attention in your body. Like I said, learning to be present with yourself too, and getting comfortable with the silence and trying to unpack all those things is very daunting, but it's kind of where you have to start. But that's not, our generation wasn't told that. And so we went out there and exceeded all these expectations that were kind of shared and cast upon us, and then had to step back and go, whoa, this didn't go the way I thought it was going to. Talk to me about confidently setting boundaries and what that looked like in terms of okay, now I've realized I've got to put some spaces in my life, or just tell me about your boundaries journey. I don't want to assume. Talk to me about that.
Boundaries for me are still a challenge. And, I have, like many women I know, have been brought up with this. Just don't rock the boat. Don't make waves. Just sit there, just be quiet, put a smile on your face, all part of that narrative. And, so people laugh at me for this, but one of the things about boundaries, it's using your voice, right? So what's important to you and being able to articulate it in a way that you're confident about what you're saying, that you're putting a stake in the ground for yourself, right? And yourself first. And so I love, Brene Brown has a great quote in her Atlas of the Heart by Trenches Hemphill that says, boundaries are the space at which I can love you and me at the same time. I'm paraphrasing, something like that. So I really try to adhere to that. So with boundaries, I'm going through something right now where my son moved back home. He's got a big dog that I love and is very sweet. But we know that long term, he's not going to be able to keep him. And so I'm in this place where, my husband loves him, my dog, my son loves him, I love him. But I know that if we say, okay, we'll keep him, that who's going to be the one walking him? Who's going to be the one feeding him? Who's going to be the one taking him to the vet, picking up the poop, doing all that stuff, right? When my son moves on. And so I feel this pressure, and I sit there with myself during the day going, oh, he's such a sweet dog. I should really just keep him. But yet at the same time, we're at this point in our life where we're going to start traveling. We like to, small dog, we throw the small dog in the car and can hit the road, right?
Right.
It's not that easy. So that's a boundary I'm working on. I was talking to my daughter the other day, who, like your daughter's, has done a lot of work around this. And she said, Mom, that's okay to say no. It's okay to set that boundary. And I know that. And I've said no, but they keep pushing. And my son, I think, had this idea that if he brought him to live with us,
You fall in love with him.
Fall in love with him, and I couldn't say no. So that's an example of where I'm really struggling. But I think what it comes down to is this sense of that your worthiness, and that it's okay for you to say what is okay and what is not okay. And there's certain parts of my life where I have no problem doing that, and I've gotten much better. But boundaries are really, really important. And I think for women who tend to take on everybody else's stuff and do for and take care of, and it's always like you end up. I think I can say safely that I will not say yes to something that will ultimately deplete me fully and not fill me back up. And so I've gotten really good with that.
That's a great gauge. I really like that example you used. Ladies, write that down. Step back, ask that question. That's going to tell you. But you also said something I think is really important. It's hard to communicate new boundaries to people, especially your family. And the people, when they're used to you showing up in a certain way, they keep thinking, this will work itself out. Yeah. And you have to continually follow up and say, no, I understand that is historically how I've shown up for you. But for the season I'm in now, and for the plans, and for me to be happy and not be irritated about this 6 months from now, this is what it has to be.
Yes. That's a very good point. It's showing up differently and really being resolute about that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And being okay if they're not okay with it. It's like, that's not your problem.
Right.
You've communicated clearly. You've let them know. They've got to work that out. But it's hard. It's easy for us to sit here and talk about. It's hard to do in that space. But if you don't do it, you feel it. You feel the irritation. You feel like
resentment.
The resentment. That's the word. And it's like, nope, and then it's on you. It's like, all right, I made that choice. I let that slide, and now I'm in this space. So and I didn't lay that boundary. I had that scenario the other day where I was really irritated. Something kept coming up with our work, and I'm like, I did this to myself. I overscheduled. I didn't pay close enough to my calendar. And so I played myself. I put myself here. So but I loved what you said. When you think about is this going to fill me? How is this going to make me feel? Is this something that I can move through and not be resentful later? Really, really good. Love that. How we can support ourselves and other women in living unapologetically. You're doing this. Your work is doing that. Like your work speaks for that for yourself. But talk to me about your journey in getting to that point. How has that played out in your life?
Well, I think there was something I thought of when you shared that question with me was how we can do that on a day-to-day basis with just the people and the relationships in our life is really getting curious and asking people in our lives, particularly women, how are you doing? And creating a space for them to be honest about it. Because I think that a lot of what you and I have discussed about those expectations is that we never created, it's hard. Space was not created to do anything but what was expected. And so I think it's asking the question, being present enough to hear the answer, and really don't settle for, no, everything's fine.
Yeah.
If something is not fine. So I think that in our everyday life is really important.
Yeah.
How I got to that point with my practice and my coaching work was I didn't want other moms and women to go through that pain that I went through. I really wanted to share my story, tell them it's okay. And consequently, I ended up, now I work more with moms who are transitioning to an empty nest because it's the same stuff comes up, right? It's the question, it's the doubt, it's the fear. It's who am I when I'm not being a mom? Like all of a sudden I'm, oh my God, how do I figure out what's next? What am I passionate about? Like they've never gotten to that point.
Yeah.
And I've also learned that all of those questions and all of those obstacles and roadblocks that come up in this massive transition in this life happen whether you are, in your 20s, your 30s, you're getting a job, you're leaving a job, maybe you lose your husband or spouse, you go through divorce. There's so many transitions, you're retiring, so many transitions we go through in life that every time we're at that transition point, those doubts and fears and limiting beliefs come up to try to stop us and keep us safe.
Absolutely. And yes, and that keep us safe. And we've tricked ourselves into thinking it's safe because we haven't been given the safe space to feel that. And so when we giving ourselves, you gave yourself permission to explore that. And by giving yourself permission and being vulnerable and authentic and sharing that, it then gives other people permission to come on that ride with you and not be afraid to ask those questions and be honest, because we kind of do a thing. I didn't always do it, but over the last few years, we've started a thing kind of in our family, kind of like, somebody, how you doing? Okay. Oh, say more. Are you doing, one word answers, are you really? Or is there, I kiss tone of voice, facial expressions, the way you carry yourselves, your posture, all that things will kind of give you away if you're not really, okay. And I think something you have on your website that I love, you open your website and you've got a quote that says, let me find it. Being a mom is what you do. It is not who you are. My friend, you are so much more. And I loved that because that's why I introduced with character traits. We as women, and it really slows people down because people will want to tell me what they do. I'm like, no, that's what you do. I want to know who you are. And then we're going to go from there. And what you do will come up organically. And then people will be able to see the connect points on from who you are, how you got to be where you are today. Right. But that is a tricky thing. We tend to let ourselves be defined by our roles and other people's expectations. And we don't take that time to give ourselves permission to speak the truth about how we're feeling, to name all the feelings, to leave room for all of them. Because I strongly believe that there's no such good thing as a good or bad emotion. Emotions are indicators and they're there to help us. But if you're truly going to get to a place of contentment, joy, gratitude, you got to leave yourself room to feel all those things, or you're just going to feel resentful and you may not even know why, because you're just trying to feign being happy or satisfied all the time. And also holding space, you can feel all those things at once. You can be irritated, angry, and also grateful that you're alive for the day and for the opportunities. And so leaving space for those nuances. But I love what you said about creating that safe space and really answering honestly how you're doing it and be able to break that down and not feeling guilty about it or bad about it. You know, not apologizing, stop saying sorry. And we do that. So it's so ingrained in us. We don't even realize that we're doing it.
There's that thing too with, not being able to talk about how you're feeling about your kids, for example, because it's all this posturing around, he got into this school and now he's working for this time. And it's so refreshing to have a conversation like, oh my God, like, I don't know what the hell's going on with him, blah, 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 blah. Just being really, really honest about where we are with our kids and where they are, because again, that just creates and this is probably a key as we're talking, is that creating that space requires your own vulnerability. Yeah. And being able to, just say, here's what's happening for me. And it's hard. It is hard.
And it is hard. And I was having a conversation yesterday with a friend about this. And because she asked me about, how did you get this? How do you do this? How do you embrace all those things and unpack all those things? I'm like, well, one, you got to be willing to do it. You got to be willing to sit with yourself, and you cannot be authentic and vulnerable with anybody else if you're not first authentic and vulnerable with yourself. I mean, it just doesn't, you can maybe fake it for a while, but it's not, it doesn't feel real, and it's going to expose itself at some point.
When you resist persists.
Yes.
So if you shut those feelings down and pretend they're not there, they will come back, whether it's in your health or they show up as resentment and anger and everything else. So.
You've ripped off your partner, your kids, or your neighbor's head off for some little thing that happened. It has nothing to do with them. And it shows up, or you've got high blood pressure, you got you anxiousness all the time, all those things. But I love, that safe space to be authentic, unapologetically, to be who we are. So important. The importance of setting and coming back to your why/your values and everything you do. I think this goes a lot with boundaries. And you talked about it earlier. I think your value about how you come to a space of knowing whether you can say yes to something or not is a really important part of that. But talk to me how you got there and about your journey with your buying values. Because I'm sure with your work too, you've got a lot of people coming at you wanting different things, family still learning how you are showing up in this space at this time,
right.
Maybe even some of your friendships. So talk to me about your why and your values.
Yeah. So the why for me was really driven from that point of never wondering what I'm passionate about, never, questioning. And that sounds, and I don't mean that in the way that, I think if you know what you're passionate about and you find a purpose in that, it's okay to have those things evolve. Right. And it's okay to ask yourself and check in and say, hey, is this still relevant? Is this still working? I used to be super passionate about this, but now, for example, I started a nonprofit. That was my first iteration.
When your kids were young.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that was my first, finding my voice and the first expression and something I was really passionate about.
Yeah.
But over time, it turned 10 years. I turned 50. My husband was turning 60 and our youngest was graduating from high school and going off to college. And I was like, this feels like a really good time to, tie it up and move on to something else, which is when I started exploring the coaching realm. So your purpose and passion can shift. Staying in touch with that is really important. My why is really about how can I, with my business, it is, I want to be able to make an impact with women throughout the world because I believe so much in the power that women have to change the world. And I feel like I get emotional talking about this because you can tell I'm passionate. I feel like all the things we've talked about is that we've been sold a bill of goods about what we can and can't do. And I mean, if you simply look around at what's happening today, right and left, our rights are being taken away.
It's not safe in so many places for us still in 2023.
Yes, exactly. And so it's going to require women to find their voice, to say, you know what, enough of this, pardon my French, BS.
Yes, absolutely.
I am ready to, show the world who I am authentically without putting up with, I'm not going to play your game anymore.
No.
Because I think that there's so much healing that we can bring to the world. Yeah. And just the energy that we bring and that, there's so much work for us to do.
Yeah.
We need to get rid of all of these stories we have and really kind of say, you know what, enough of this. I'm done.
Right.
I'm ready to move on. That is my big part of my life.
I love that.
Are such an integral part of day-to-day living. I think I see them as kind of the guardrails and the bumpers for what we do, the choices we make. And I think it's hard for a lot of people to identify what their values are. They really are such an integral part of the people we hang out with, the person we marry, how we raise our kids, the food we buy, the clothing we buy, all of those things. And so getting clear on your values is really important. And it's a really great check-in point to say, wait a minute, is this something that aligns with my values? Because sometimes you feel yucky about something, a situation or a person, and you're not really sure what it is. And if you have that guideline where you can drop in and go, I know what it is. This is out of alignment with my values. And so this is not a good place for me to spend my time. It's really, really helpful. And I think you mentioned on your earlier podcast, your last episode, I know I'll be released in a while. So I think it's episode 10 that you guys were talking about the values and that there are assessment tools. And Brene Brown has some great podcasts on values that she does with her sisters. And it's really worth digging into because what I've found is that women who are on this journey to discover who they are, any kind of a filter or any kind of a tool that you can have that will give you insight into another peek into who you are and what makes you tick is a really valuable tool, which is why I say it's so important to get curious. So if you hear something on a podcast or somebody's talking about it, pull that thread, go listen to the podcast. If they talk about a book, go buy the book, because oftentimes those are things that are telling us that, hey, there's a message here for you.
Yes.
And that's what I got out of all those self-help books all those years ago was like, oh, I get it now. This is, I'm not crazy. There's not something wrong with me. This totally resonates for me.
Yeah, I'm a big Brene Brown follower too. I've got all the books. She talked about Atlas of the Heart earlier. We've got, all of her brave journeys. I'm not going to get to tell those right, but yes. And the ones with her, and those are really what got my attention during the pandemic when she started dropping episodes and started the podcast. Mm-hmm. And I love the ones with her sisters and just resonating with that. But yeah, I loved so many things you said there about coming together as women. I mean, I started this because I'm like, we've got to start having these conversations. Mm-hmm. We have got to start coming together and learning from each other, learning from each other's different experiences. So we not only know how to show up for ourselves, but we know how to show up for each other as a united front, because we're only going to move the needle when we stop battling each other. As long as we're battling each other and not learning about each other, I cannot have the same experience as you. I cannot have the same experiences as my friends in different parts of the country based on their ethnicity, their culture, their socioeconomic status. All those things come into play and affect people's walk through these talking points today. So it's coming together and listening and learning. And I used to talk about listening to that body. If something is nudging you or even makes you feel a little uncomfortable, unpack that. Be curious. You've said that several times. And one of my mantras is be a learner and be curious, because we're continually evolving. And also you spoke to the fact that seasons go through your life, things are going to change. Be willing to look at that. There are seasons. That thing you did for 10 years as that nonprofit was absolutely right on. But then you got to a point, and as women, I think sometimes we have a hard time letting go of things.
Yes.
And releasing those things, whether it's a job or a relationship or a hobby. We change and we grow and evolve. And if we listen and trust ourselves, that will come to the forefront, but we've got to be willing to do that. So being curious about that, so much good stuff there. Thank you, Bridget. I feel like that was just like a master class in how to walk that out and how we need to show up as women because the old prescriptions of doing things the way we've been doing them for the last 2,000, 3,000 years. I mean, because it goes back forever in terms of others deciding what our life and role and rights should look like and how we should show up for everybody else. That has not worked. It's gotten us to this point. So taking ownership starts with taking ownership of yourself.
Absolutely.
And you cannot take ownership and be a part of the greater movement if you don't start there and then willing to listen and learn and realize we are not a monolith. Your experience is yours, but someone else's is theirs. And if they're saying that's experience, you don't want anyone dismissing yours. Don't dismiss theirs and learning and coming together so we can do and create the space we want it to be for us. So
absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I'm ready to go. You've got me all charged up. Like, let's go. Living out of our own expectations versus others. When do you feel like you transitioned to that point? And talk to me about your path with that.
Yeah, that was in those moments where I was really questioning who I was and what was important to me, because I had been on this path that I always thought was the way I was supposed to go. And I kind of went, okay, I got there and was like, now what? Now what do we do? Who am I?
Yeah.
It was terrifying. And that really was it. I was in an existential crisis.
Yeah.
Right? And the reason I do this work is so that other moms and other women don't have to get to that point where they are. I mean, I moved out of my house for a year.
Wow.
I was ready to get a divorce because I was just like, we were in therapy. I could not communicate what was happening. He couldn't understand it. He was just like, what the hell's going on?
You're right. I have no idea
what's happening. And I couldn't express it. And I was so committed at that point in time to understanding why I was here. I really wanted it to be as part of the family.
Yeah.
But I was ready to make that break because I felt like I started suffocating because the more I was starting to go, I need to figure this out. He was so terrified. It was like he was holding on tighter and tighter. And that's why I got to that point where I was just like, I need to go.
I got to create some space. Yeah.
And I am so profoundly grateful for the fact that we were able to work it out and get back together. And we celebrate 30 years this year. And it hasn't been with a lot of trial and error and conversation.
Yeah.
But, I think I went off the path there, but that was my crisis point of just like, I'm ready to do this on my own. And I would never advocate for that. Right. It was just me personally. There was no other option. And I felt this need so desperately and this drive so desperately that's what I had to do.
I think we hear women talking about this a lot. I think a lot of women get to this point, and I love what you're saying. And this is why I do what I do too. You don't have to get there if you start asking the question sooner. But that took a lot of bravery for you to do that, to encourage, because I'm sure the expectations around you were like, what in the heck is Bridget doing?
Yes.
And getting to the point where like, I can't let that disrupt what I know I have to figure out in order for me to not only live the life I want to live, but to be the kind of partner that your husband should have, to be the kind of parent that your kids should have. And the fact that that's a beautiful story. And I know that doesn't always go that way. Sometimes we walk away from these situations and we don't end up coming back together. Yeah. And so it doesn't always work out that way, but just being true to yourself to the point of like, I know I cannot show up like this anymore. Something has to give. And so thank you for sharing that. That's really,
absolutely.
And so I think just ask the questions, trust the inner knowing. And because it is so hard, I understand the whole journey in 30 years. My husband and I will be at 30 years in here soon too, this summer, celebrating 30 years.
Congratulations.
But I get it. We've had our points of like how we're going isn't working. Right. And so we've got to figure this out and go down a different path, because this isn't good for either one of us. Right. And it's real easy to get comfortable and just ignore it and just kind of go on living. But you got to ask yourself, what kind of life am I living? Don't I deserve better? Do they deserve better? This isn't a way to live, and being willing to go on that. So thanks for sharing that. I think that's absolutely so important. Accepting the layered aspects of ourselves. You've talked a lot about the journey you went through, and it's hard to accept all those layers. It's hard to look back at, when we've lived outside of our own expectations. Those are choices we made, but we don't see it at the time. We see it as we don't have a choice. But when you sit down, like, no, I do. I have to start taking my life back and accepting those layers and accepting I did have a choice. It just felt too scary not to choose something else. And there's truth to that. But embracing all those parts of yourself that are like, oof. But it's like, based on what I knew at the time, that's what I did. And and what did I learn from that? And whether it's just, I just don't ever want to do that again. But not being afraid of, because I don't think you can fully love yourself. I don't think you can fully be compassionate or empathetic with yourself and in turn anybody else until you're able to go on that layers journey. But it's hard.
Oh, it's so hard. And you're absolutely right, because you can't just pick and choose the parts of yourself that you want to support and dig into, because like we talked about earlier, those other parts of you are going to, they definitely will have a say one way or the other. And that is the self-love and self-compassion and self-worth journey, is to say, I'm all of these things, and I love myself. It's okay. And, I wrote something, one of my very good friends lost her husband at the beginning of the year. And I remember being in such profound grief but also, then finding joy. And I felt this in something else that was happening in my life, and feeling this, tug of war of like, is this okay? And to your point, is making space for all of that. Yeah. And, for me, what I do is I kind of drop in and go give a visual of where it is in my body and wrap it in light and just accept it and say, you're welcome here. And I wrote this poem about it. And it's like, you are welcome here, because I know no matter what I do, you are going to show up at some point in my life again. And please just make room for the joy and the love and the laughter along with the grief, because, I need all of those things too. And I think until, it's people talk about your shadow self and the things that are not so fun to embrace. But just like you can't pick only the good feelings you want in life, you can't just pick joy, because you have to have pain in order to know joy.
Right.
You have to have sadness in order to know happiness. You have to have otherwise it's just monochromatic. And so to understand that there are all of these parts to yourself and that it's okay and that to love all of them because you can't, I remember early on in my journey and thinking about kind of the ups and downs and just like, God, I just want to be on the ups.
Right. I know. I'm like, keep me on the mountaintop. No more valleys.
And when you choose a life of really getting vulnerable and understanding and being authentic with yourself, you not only because you wouldn't know them if you didn't know the other, but you can't feel the good without feeling the bad. Like you can't just say, okay, wake me up only when the good stuff happens.
Right.
You're going to feel it all.
Yeah.
With the same emotion, the same passion, the same energy.
Absolutely. And that's living. That's living. If you want to live the fullest, messiest, hardest, beautiful life, you have to be open to that. And that's really difficult to do because I know for me for years, what I would wake up in the morning and whatever the lead emotion or feeling was that day, that's what I ran with. And everything else got pushed to the side. And you can't live that way. I mean, you can, but it's not sustainable. No, and it's going to, it's just accepting because it goes back to the beginning where you can't prioritize self-care for something you don't feel is worth the self-care. And so I really think it goes, so I think those things it's kind of this circular thing. I first have to fully love myself. And before I'm really going to make this a priority, because I've got to believe I'm worth it. But even within that, it's like, I'm going to start these practices and build up over time. But it starts with that feeling like you are value, and believing that you're worth the time. In living out feel, in finding empowerment and embracing layers, how that has affected your relationship with yourself and then in turn with others. And you've given some insight on that already. I would imagine when your husband and you came back together after that journey, you were able to show up for each other in a whole different way than before. But
yes. Yeah. And I think, you've spoken about this a couple of times is that emotions show up differently. And sometimes you think you're really ticked off, at your husband, but really you're really disappointed that something that you were really hoping would happen didn't happen. Right.
Yeah.
But it comes off as like snapping at your husband.
Yeah.
And so what I feel I've been able to learn over the course of this journey is to really, yes, I snap. 100%. Right. Because sometimes it comes out before I can stop it. But then being able to stop and think, okay, what's really happening right now? And then being able to go back and own that has made a difference, right? It's made a difference in our relationship. And that's not easy to do. It's really not, especially in certain instances.
Sure.
I think with my son moving back home for the first time since he went away to college, living back at home after 6 years of being on his own, there was a lot of that really, I had a lot of angst and anxiety for him moving in. Is it going to be back like we were in high school? Like I've changed, he's changed, we've changed. What's our relationship going to be like? And just being honest with that when he came in and really recognizing that rather than saying this is what I expect to happen is really just holding back and seeing what shows up. Yeah. And so I think that's totally sidetracked from what your original question was, but it's really about taking ownership of your own, you have a choice in how you respond in every situation.
Right.
Sometimes it doesn't feel like it, but you do. Yeah. And so while the emotional thing is to say X, take that moment to look back at yourself and really realize that, or if it is about them, understand it at a level where you can communicate it in a non-emotional, super, inflamed way.
Right.
Pick your time to have that conversation so that you can say, look, this is what was going on for me. Here's what I've noticed. This is what I'm observing. Is that how it feels? So that you can have a productive conversation. So I feel like that is an ongoing project for me, but that was probably one of the biggest ways that this work has impacted my relationships. Same thing with my friends,
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's that accountability piece is so important, both for ourselves, especially for ourselves. I think it's hard to like, oh, shoot, I really need to contribute to that. But also to that communication, how you communicate. You can say one thing a lot of different ways.
Yes.
And also recognizing in yourself, I am too fired up right now to have this conversation, but I know it needs to happen. So can we, not being afraid to say, this needs to be addressed. Can we come back to it later? I need a moment. And then setting that time so that you do actually come back to it, not letting it get away from you because it'll come up again. But recognizing where you are too in that moment. Can I do this in a way that's going to be constructive and helpful to the situation? Or is it just going to pour more fuel on the fire?
Yes, exactly.
And when you do pour fuel on the fire, because it'll happen, come back and being accountable for that. Like, I needed to say what I had to say. I did not show up in it the way I wanted to.
Right.
And it didn't come out and communicate. Can we have a do-over? Being willing to do that too, I think is so important. So,
absolutely.
We are down to the rapid fire. Name 5 activities that nourish you.
Connecting with friends and family, meditation, an occasional spa, a walk, nature, just getting really present to the birds singing and the flowers blooming, and just being present to that, to me, takes me out of whatever funk is going on. Yeah, no, I think that's so strong. For me, it's the ocean, the mountains, nature. I can be present and be like, so yeah, I love that. Yeah, I totally understand that. 5 words on how you want to feel the next 6 months. I'm not sure how to phrase this, but at ease, in flow, joyful, present, loved. I think purposeful on purpose.
Yeah, really good. Oh, I like those. Those are really good. All right, Bridget, tell us now. Audience, don't worry. This is going to be on our website. You're going to see it. So if you don't have a notebook with you, if you're driving down the freeway and you're like, oh no, I don't have anything to write this down. 1, it'll be recorded. So you can go back and listen to it. 2, you'll be able to find it. But talk to us about your work, where we can find you, and anything you want to say about all that you're doing there. Beautiful website. Talk about Magenta too. I love Magenta's the website, but I love the naming behind that. So,
thank you. Yeah, the naming. I came from a marketing background, so I'm all about the name and the brand. And I spoke to this on my Instagram account where I said I used to have it being Magenta as my logo, and because before I even knew what I was going to be or how I was going to communicate or what my business looked like, I knew that I had to figure out my brand and my colors and the name, right? And which seems so silly. It's like that's my right.
It's when people gets attention, though. It's powerful. It matters.
It's powerful. But so Magenta is all about finding that harmony and balance in your life between the feeling and the thinking, and so being Magenta means to be in that balance, finding that balance and being in harmony, really. And so the website you can find is bridgetbelden.com. There are, there's a blog that's attached to that. You can find my social media through there as well. I have a Facebook group as well that you can join through there. And my goal is to be more intentional and productive in my Facebook group. I do post there and engage, but not quite as frequently as I would like to.
Yeah.
But you can also sign up for a 45-minute free Pathway to Purpose. Really a breakthrough session to understand, where we talk one-on-one about, what are the things that are getting in your way. And the website messaging is really around the empty nest, but reiterating and kind of restating what I said earlier is that in this journey, doing this work, I've really learned that transitions of all kinds it's the same stuff that comes up. So if you are a woman who is going through any kind of a transition and is just feeling overwhelmed or feeling stuck or feeling like you have no idea what the heck you're going to do next.
Yeah.
I would love to chat with you about that. And I will offer an action plan, kind of a mini plan for you to get going. We could talk about ways to work together and all of that good stuff. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Good
the website
stuff.
is probably the best hub.
Sure, absolutely. And it's beautiful. It's a beautiful website. You can tell she's got the marketing back. I told her when we got on, like, the website is fabulous. And I was like, that makes sense. She knows how to do it. She knows how, she's got that tool built. Okay. Well, Bridget, thank you so much. This was such a great conversation today. I think this is good for me as the audience because I resonate with so much with your journey, but I know this is going to give our listeners so many tools and so many things to think about. So I really appreciate your time with us today.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed it as well. And your thoughtful questions and the messaging that you are sharing with your audience, I think is so critical. So I love your work and I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so glad you reached out. What a great conversation. Feel podcast audience again, embracinglayers.com. Go to the sources, go to the show notes, follow our social media. All those things are there on the website. So you know how you can connect with Bridget and just get these tools and just learn from her. And we're so thankful that you are with us here today. Women, be unapologetic. Know that you're worth so much more than you already believe. And if you already believe it, keep going and invite another woman to come on that journey with you.
Absolutely.
We thank you and have a great week.